She wasn't caught in crossfire. She wasn't in a combat zone by accident. Shireen was standing on an empty street in Jenin, wearing a helmet and a bulletproof vest, clearly marked press, doing her job, reporting. President Biden promised accountability. The White House called for the shooter to be prosecuted. But when it became clear that an Israeli soldier, not a Palestinian militant, had killed her, something changed. No one was named, no one was charged, no one was held accountable, and the case went cold. Until earlier this year. The new documentary, Who Killed Shireen, picks up where the government left off. And what this investigative team uncovered is nothing short of explosive. When Shireen Abu Akleh was killed in 2022, Dion knew immediately that something was wrong. The official explanations didn't match the evidence, so Dion did what investigative journalists do. He went looking for the truth.
I was really maddened by the way that it was covered. We set out in the documentary to explain clearly what happened to her, and we set out to find the shooter. I think the most challenging thing was identifying the Israeli soldier. We hit a lot of dead ends looking for that guy.
Take us to that moment then when, when you did get the source. How was that when he revealed the name?
And he said, no, it wasn't him. It was Alon Scagio.
Looking at that and the fact that you, a journalist, could find out who the killer was, but the White House and the State Department claimed they couldn't. How do you explain the gap? Or was it rather they couldn't or they didn't want to?
This was an American citizen that was killed. America certainly could have pressed to get Israel to provide that access on behalf of an American citizen.
Looking at one of the most disturbing revelations in the film is the Duvdevan using Shireen's photograph for target practice.
The Israeli military blocked the FBI from carrying out an investigation in Israel and refused to cooperate with them. The Israeli government refused to provide the soldier's name. And it turned out nobody in the Biden administration ever got the name. They never got it.
Shireen's killing wasn't an isolated incident. More than 280 journalists have been killed in Gaza.
This war is not over. Keep asking the critical question and keep pushing for accountability and justice in this conflict.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Real Talk. I'm Daizy Gedeon. And if you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button. And please, if you're keen to support independent media, buy me a coffee, support the team, and keep us going with the work that we're doing to try to bring you real stories with real people on the Real Talk show. So thanks very much for being with us. Today, we're diving into one of the most important investigative documentaries of 2025, a film that accomplished what the United States government, with all its influence, might, and resources, claimed was impossible. Let me set the scene for our discussion by providing you with some background. On May 11th, 2022, Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed while covering an Israeli military raid in the occupied West Bank. She wasn't caught in crossfire. She wasn't in a combat zone by accident. Shireen was standing on an empty street in Jenin, wearing a helmet and a bulletproof vest, clearly marked press, doing her job, reporting. The killing of Shireen sent shockwaves across the Arab world and beyond. For over 20 years, she had been a trusted voice bringing news from Palestine to 500 million viewers on Al Jazeera. She was a household name, the kind of journalist who entire generations grew up watching. And she was an American citizen. Within hours, Israeli authorities blamed Palestinian gunmen for her death. But the Palestinian journalists who were there, who watched their colleague get killed, said the fatal shots came from Israeli soldiers positioned 200 meters up the road. There were no Palestinian gunmen in the area near Shireen. President Biden promised accountability. The White House called for the shooter to be prosecuted. But when it became clear that an Israeli soldier, not a Palestinian militant, had killed her, something changed. The calls for prosecution disappeared. The Biden administration released a statement calling her death the result of tragic circumstances and said they couldn't determine if it was intentional. No one was named, no one was charged, no one was held accountable, and the case went cold until earlier this year. The new documentary, Who Killed Shireen, produced by the independent news outlet Zeteo, picks up where the government left off. And what this investigative team uncovered is nothing short of explosive. They found the shooter's name, Alon Scagio, a 20-year-old sniper with the elite Israeli Special Forces unit Duvdevan. They found his memorial page, which the Israeli military had scrubbed of his unit affiliation. They found evidence that he was on his first combat deployment in the West Bank. They also found soldiers from his own unit who confirmed he pulled the trigger. And they found something even more disturbing. After Alon died in combat a couple of years later, his unit, angry his actions had been criticised, God forbid, reportedly used Shireen's photograph for target practice. But the documentary doesn't stop at identifying the shooter. It exposes what one retired US military colonel calls a cover-up at the highest levels of the American government. Colonel Steve Gabavics, a military police officer with 30 years' experience, led the US investigation into Shireen's death. He was on the scene a week later. He measured the distances, he tested the sight lines, and his conclusion? That an Israeli soldier at 190 meters away with advanced optics in a stable firing position would have clearly seen the blue press vest and blue helmet. The shots were aimed, intentional, fired at head level in a tight group, and Colonel Gabavics says there's enough evidence for a conviction of manslaughter or murder beyond a reasonable doubt. But that's not what the State Department told the public. In fact, Colonel Gabavics, who was the whistleblower in the Who Killed Shireen documentary on condition of anonymity, so you don't see his face, and only last month actually went fully public, appearing on Democracy Now! And other outlets, putting his name and face to his allegations of a US government cover-up. In the doco, he bluntly states the initial conclusion was that Shireen was intentionally killed, that the soldier absolutely knew it was a non-combatant and that she was media. That conclusion was changed, Gabavics says, because the administration didn't want to anger Israel. But here's what makes this story even more urgent. Shireen's killing wasn't an isolated incident. Since October 7th, 2023, more than 280 journalists have been killed in Gaza, making Israel the most dangerous country in the world for journalists. The Israeli military now labels journalists as combat propagandists. And just weeks before this documentary premiered in May, Ali Samoudi, the Al Jazeera producer who was shot alongside Shireen and survived, was arrested by Israeli forces and has been held without charge ever since. Even Senator Chris Van Owen, US Senator Chris Van Owen, who has read the classified US report on Shireen's death, has said explicitly the Biden administration's failure to hold Israel accountable for the killing of Shireen contributed to more American deaths and more journalists in Gaza and Lebanon being killed. It was, in his words, giving them the green light. Our guest today is the journalist who made this investigation possible. Dion Nissenbaum is an award-winning foreign correspondent and a two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist for international reporting. More than 20 years he has covered the world's most dangerous conflicts, from Afghanistan and Iraq to Lebanon, Yemen, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Most recently, a correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Dion has even been kidnapped in Gaza, blown up in Beirut, and shot at by Houthi fighters in Yemen. He's lost journalist friends to Israeli tank fire also. When Shireen Abu Akleh was killed in 2022, Dion knew immediately that something was wrong. The official explanations didn't match the evidence, so Dion did what investigative journalists do. He went looking for the truth. The resulting documentary, Who Killed Shireen, is more than an investigation into one journalist's death. It's an examination of how governments protect their allies, how accountability disappears when it's politically inconvenient, and how the killing of journalists has become an accepted part of modern warfare. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome to the show a fellow journalist who has not sold his soul to the propagandists and the dollar and maintains the highest standards and ethics of journalism, which is a rare creature to find these days. Dion Nissenbaum, welcome to Real Talk.
Thank you so much for having me, Daisy. It's great to be here.
And sorry for such a long introduction and holding you back, but we put this one into the picture. It allows us to get right into the guts of the story, into details. I do want to start with something else other than the documentary before we dive in. I want to talk about you just for a few minutes because your history is fascinating also. I'm in Beirut. And I was, I've been here. I haven't been here throughout the entire period, but I was here during the Civil War, the late 80s and early 90s. And I just would love to know more about your story and how you got blown up in Beirut and a little bit about the kidnapping in Gaza for our audience to know about you.
Sure. Thanks. I started my career covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in 2005 for an American media outlet. And I covered Gaza. The first thing I covered was the Israeli pullout from Gaza in 2005 when they pulled out all of their settlers and soldiers. I was there to witness the Israeli soldiers and settlers leaving. I was there when the last Israeli soldiers left. I went into the Israeli settlements in 2005 with the Palestinians for the first time. Incredible, incredible moments. And during that period, there was this security vacuum. And in that period of time, I was kidnapped by a Keystone Cop group of Palestinian militants in Khan Yunis. The car got stuck in the sand 5 minutes into our kidnapping, and they had to push it out. It was kind of an absurd moment. Unfortunately, in Gaza in that period of time, kidnappings were more sort of like performative. It was an effort to put pressure on the new Palestinian government to release friends or relatives that were in prison. The people that kidnapped myself and British photographer Adam Pletz, they actually wanted jobs with the security services. So, it was a different time, but I covered the Palestinian conflict through that period of time. I covered the 2006 war with Hezbollah. I crossed from Israel into Lebanon, into southern Lebanon at that period of time. I was in Gaza when Hamas took over in 2007, one of the few reporters there when Hamas seized control, and covered Operation Cast Lead, which was another tough Israeli operation in Gaza. Documented a lot of the war crimes that were committed by Israeli forces at that time. And my career from there, I spent a couple of years in Afghanistan as well, covering the U.S. Military surge. Spent a lot of time going down to southern Afghanistan, unembedded and also embedded, to cover that story. And from there, sort of bopped around, was back and forth from Washington, D.C., covering the Pentagon. I was in Turkey. I covered the attempted coup in Turkey, and was actually detained in Turkey and kicked out for an innocuous retweet that President Erdogan didn't like, and it was persona non grata there to this day, which is sad for me because I really love Istanbul. And then, yeah, was covered the Trump White House for a while, and then was in Beirut in 2020 when the big port explosion happened, and we lived in Mar Mikhail, the neighborhood right next to the port, and our apartment was destroyed, and our daughter was 4 years old at the time, and the blast hit us. I had to throw myself on top of her to shield her from the blast, and she was still badly injured. And from there, sort of went back to DC, to the US for a while during COVID, and then returned to be based in Brussels, but still covering the Middle East for the Wall Street Journal. I was the first Wall Street Journal reporter to go down to southern Israel after October 7th to cover the aftermath of the Hamas attack, and was one of the the first reporters to go into one of these kibbutz Kfar Aza where there were the allegations in other media of beheaded babies, which I reported on in the time and did not report on because there was no evidence that there were beheaded babies. And it's another episode where I'm proud that, my reporting and, my diligence prevented the Wall Street Journal from making a horrific
Well
mistake in
done.
that regard.
Well
But
done.
Shireen's killing happened during this time as well, and I was with the Wall Street Journal, and I was really maddened by the way that it was covered. I wasn't covering it directly, but just to see how her story was twisted and contorted by the Israeli narrative and the way that the Western media embraced the Israeli narrative over what the journalists at the scene were saying. As you
Mm,
said, Palestinian journalists said from the very beginning she was killed by an Israeli sniper that intentionally targeted her, which is, in fact, what the Israeli military itself concluded.
mm,
But if you talk to even US officials that were involved in it at the time, they still have this in their mind that it was an accident or she was, dodging bullets, and it was not the case. And so we set out in the documentary to
prove it.
explain clearly what happened to her, and we set out to find the shooter. We set out to find out what the Biden administration did. And fortunately, we did find Colonel Gabavics, who came forward to
Mm.
tell us what he concluded from his on-the-ground investigation, which in my mind was as important, if not more important, than identifying the shooter.
Definitely. And we're going to get into that. But thank you for that historical background. I mean, what a wealth of experience. I mean, you've covered all the major, wars and conflicts and been in the most important places. So the knowledge that you have, and obviously the connections you have, and the sources you have, also help you to produce high quality journalism, and sticking to the facts, sticking to the truth. And, good on you for stopping the Wall Street Journal from, sharing the false narrative of the beheaded babies. That's, yeah, that crazy story that took more than a year, and the rapes and all of the propaganda they put out there to try and win public opinion. And they succeeded for a long time until
Mhm.
it was all discredited. But well done. And it's proof that journalists really can. And I do know journalists from The Guardian who tried, and they left, and they've left major organizations because at the end their stories were being rewritten by higher level people up in, either in America or in England, and they just couldn't stay in those institutions. So great to have you. Thank you for that introduction. Let's get into the documentary and the work and the investigation. But let me just start with the incredible woman, Shireen Abu Akleh. In the intro, I covered her background, but what made Shireen for you? I mean, such a significant person beyond the fact. What did she mean to Palestinians, to journalists, to you personally?
Yeah, Shireen was, for American audiences, she's sort of the Christiane Amanpour of the Middle East. The thing that I think stands out to me most is, that she was just known as this person of compassion and empathy in the industry. She was a mentor, especially for young female journalists coming up. I've talking to so many female journalists who saw her as a mentor
Mm,
and someone to look up to. And in our industry, that's not someone to find, especially in television journalism. There's so
mm,
many egos for the people on camera, and she was not that at all. She was very good friends with my colleague Fatima Abdul Karim, who she and I set out to do this documentary. She's an incredible Palestinian journalist herself who started this journey with me, and it was a passion project for us. Fatima was in Ramallah when Shireen was killed. She had just seen her a few nights before at a bar in Ramallah. They had made plans to go out. Fatima went to the Al Jazeera office immediately when they were finding out what happened to Shireen. Fatima was at her funeral that was attacked by Israeli police and causing pallbearers to nearly drop her casket,
Mm,
which is also one of the most sort of disturbing moments of her killing and the aftermath. And she was committed to telling the Palestinian story. This raid in Jenin, where she was killed, was not a big story for international news, and even some of her colleagues said it's not worth going up there. But she was so committed that she went up there and wanted to tell that story. And she put her life on the line over and over again. I think the other thing that stands out to me about Shireen is that she wasn't a daredevil. There are a lot of people, including Christiane Amanpour, that took,
mm,
incredible risks, running sniper lines during the Yugoslavia war. Shireen put her life on the line, but she wasn't a daredevil. She looked after her team. She didn't take unnecessary risks.
mm,
And, as we point out in the documentary, even in this case, she wasn't putting herself at any risk that any other responsible journalist would have done. She was wearing the blue flak jacket with press on it. She was wearing a blue helmet. There was no gunfire happening when she walked up the street. There was no gunfire coming from where she was. She was coming from 200 meters away, walking in the open with a group of journalists all wearing these blue press vests. And so she was not a risk taker. And as Fatima says in the documentary, for her to be killed, and as Shireen's brother also says, almost anybody could be killed in these circumstances because she wasn't taking an
mm.
unnecessary risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And the small, window that they had to get her, it's not like they had a lot of access or human flesh available to them. It was a very intentional attack or a hit on her. Yeah.
For
When
sure.
Shireen was killed and the official response started to fall apart, what made you decide I'm going to go and find the shooter, or made you guys decide you want to go and find the shooter, and pitching it to you? Did you start by pitching it to Zeteo? With you made the decision, but first, what made you want to do that?
I was at the Wall Street Journal when Shireen was killed, but not working directly on her story. And at the time, I was encouraging the Wall Street Journal to do its own visual investigation. The Wall Street Journal editors decided not to do that, but other outlets, the New York Times, Washington Post, AP, CNN, Forensic Architecture, all of these people did their own investigations to clearly show that it was incredibly likely that Shireen was killed by an Israeli soldier.
Mm,
And, even the Israeli investigation itself concluded that the Israeli soldier intentionally shot her. What the Israeli military's investigation was that the soldier mistook her for a militant and intentionally killed her, thinking she was a militant.
mm,
But when all of this was happening, when all of this was coming out, you can go back and look at the stories, and it's so obfuscated by caveats. And, the Israeli military said, we can't be certain that it was an Israeli soldier, but it's most likely this person, even though their own investigation shows there's no evidence that she could have been killed by a Palestinian gunman as they tried to claim initially. Their own investigation shows there were no Palestinian gunmen near her. Their own investigation shows there was no gunfire from Palestinians. I would talk to American officials about her killing, and they would even these were people directly involved in responding to her investigation. They had access to classified information about her killing. And even they would say, well, she was dodging gunfire and it was an accident. And it just drove me mad that even top American officials didn't understand what happened.
mm,
And so Fatima and I, working with the director, Connor Powell, developed an idea for a project. Connor's actually a longtime Fox News journalist who I met in Afghanistan. He also worked in Jerusalem. He left Fox because of his own concerns about the way Fox was turning, and the three of us came together, to develop this project. We brought it to Zeteo and Mehdi Hasan, who I've known for many years, and he said, "What do you think about doing this as a documentary?" And we said, "Yeah, we'd love to do it as a documentary." We'd been thinking about maybe doing it as a podcast, and we set out to find out who killed Shireen as kind of the narrative arc for the story. And even Mehdi and Connor and other people, they didn't actually think we would find the shooter. I think I'm the only person on the team that had confidence we could find the shooter.
Mm.
And we set out and working with our team, uh, we've took us to these incredibly unexpected places. And
Well,
uh,
one of the most striking aspects of the film is when you meet when your colleague Ari in Israel gets information, starts getting information from members of the Duvdevan unit, that is elite special unit. And how did you know him, and how did he build trust, or you build trust to be able to, get some of those soldiers from that unit to actually talk?
Yeah, so Ari Flansreich is also an incredible young Canadian journalist, actually, and he and I worked together in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. So he was working as a fixer, as sort of a news assistant and aide, right after October 7th for the Wall Street Journal. So he and I went down to southern Israel together, and we had these incredible. Uh, it was my first time meeting him. We basically drove down to southern Israel while the aftermath of the attack was still unfolding. We were in Sderot, one of the cities, when there was a Hamas rocket attack, and were caught out, exposed in the open, and had to run for a bomb shelter together. We were up a couple of days later on the Israel-Lebanon border on October 11th, 2023, when Israel was thinking about carrying out a preemptive attack to kill Hassan Nasrallah. And we were on the border. We were in a bomb shelter with Israeli soldiers. When they got word over their radio, they were told that Hezbollah forces had crossed the border in paragliders and trucks and had launched the second front, and they were being told to prepare to defend their position, which
Mm.
turned out to be false. But we literally heard them getting that information on their radio,
Wow.
and we were in a bomb shelter, and we basically took off from there. So Ari and I had these incredibly bonding experiences after that, and I knew he was an incredible journalist from working with him in these intense situations.
Mm.
And he had some established contacts with the Duvdevan unit at that point. We actually met a Duvdevan trainer after October 7th and talked with him about what he was doing to help Israeli civilians prepare for a potential second front from Hezbollah.
Mm.
And so when we were doing this documentary, one of the great things about reporting in Israel is it's a very small country, and everybody knows everybody, and really things are like Lebanon, really like 3 degrees of separation, like as in Lebanon and Israel, it's always like, hey, do you know so and so? Or, are you cousins with so and so? And that's really how we did it, is working the angles and finding somebody who knows somebody. And Ari proved to be, the key that opened that door for us to get us into the Duvdevan unit.
Right, right, excellent. Take us to that moment then when when you did get the source. Ari finds you the guy from the Duvdevan, and he's not prepared to show his face, but he tells you the name. It just suddenly comes out. How did that feel? Because I know in the film, and I really encourage everyone listening to or watching to watch the documentary, and I'll put a link in our caption. But yeah, like it was such a shock anticipating myself. It was like trying to feel your energy at the time. How was that when he revealed the name?
Yeah,
Alon Scagio?
yeah, Alon Scagio. Yeah,
Alon Scagio.
it was an incredible moment. We condense a lot of our reporting, obviously, for the film.
Mm,
But we got some evidence before we went to Israel. Ari was talking with these soldiers. He was able to plug into a group of Duvdevan soldiers that knew the shooter. And the initial tip that we heard was that the soldier was killed in Gaza, and which turned out not to be true. It
Mm.
was true that he was dead, but not he was not killed in Gaza. But what we did is I went through the list of all of the Duvdevan soldiers who had been killed in Gaza, and it was about 10 of them. And we kind of were able to eliminate most of them because they weren't serving in Duvdevan when Shireen was killed, or they were medics, or there were other reasons that they couldn't have been the shooter. And we narrowed it down to two or three people we thought it could be. And none of them seemed exactly right, but when we did sit down with this soldier, we had a name that I wanted to present, and we knew that he was dead. And so we sat down with this guy, and we're talking about Duvdevan and kind of getting him to talk about the unit. And I said, well, we didn't go in, you know, guns blazing to be like, who killed Shireen? With the reporting, we
Warm him
kind of
up.
exactly. And we get to you get to this incident, and like, do you remember this incident in Jenin where the journalist was killed? Did you know that guy? And he's like, of course I knew that guy. I knew him personally. And he's like, the first thing you need to know about this guy is that he's dead. And so we got the confirmation that he was dead. And
Mm.
then actually what I did was I mentioned the name of this other guy that I thought it was. And I was like, oh yeah, it was this guy. Lia Valouche, I think was his name. And he
Mm.
said, no, no, it wasn't him. It was Alon Scagio. And Alon Scagio was not a name that we had because he wasn't killed in Gaza. And in fact, he had been moved out of Duvdevan.
Mm.
And so when he was killed in Jenin a year later, there was no record that he was actually with Duvdevan. So
Wow.
we got this name, and I'm looking him up actually while we're doing the interview, being like, how is this the guy? It's not, things aren't adding up. And so we left the interview and we're like, oh my God, like we didn't know when we went in that he would have the name, that he would give us the name so readily.
Mm.
And we go back to the hotel and we start sort of looking up, doing research. And then we find his memorial page where it says that he had joined Duvdevan right before being deployed to the West Bank for the first time. And he was deployed to the West Bank a few months before Shireen was killed. So we could show that he was in the West Bank. And then it showed that he was actually transferred out of Duvdevan a few months after Israel completed its investigation, which kind of showed that he was shifted out sort of as a way
To
to
hide him.
to hide him. Yeah. And
Mm.
so this all sort of lined up, and then we got a second Israeli soldier to confirm that he was the killer. And so it was, yeah, an incredible moment where, all of the research you bring into an interview leads you to this moment where you bring a piece of information
Mm.
and hoping it's correct, or hoping that it will do exactly what it did, which is like, no, no, it's not him, it's this guy. And
Yeah.
so, it worked exactly as we hoped to get that information.
It's like you couldn't have scripted it better, but I mean, and I know I'm smiling and I know we're smiling, and it's a tragic topic, but I'm smiling because I'm happy for justice. I'm happy that, people with the right intention can get justice, for Shireen and for others. And that just gives me joy, that there gives me hope, because there's so much that really is disturbing in the world today. But, yeah, and you mentioned then that you went and you verified, and I saw that you even went to his burial site, like his coffin,
Great
his
thing.
yeah, and there was a lot of paraphernalia that proved that he was part of the Duvdevan and stuff like that. So it was irrefutable, and that's excellent too for verification, because then you want to be credible. You got to, and that's the thing, is like you've got so much evidence now that, and you don't want to be pointing a finger at the wrong person either. I mean, that would be the worst thing to do, not pointing someone
And
out that won't be.
yeah, and there's a couple of things. First of all, we worked with the New York Times when the documentary came out to give them an exclusive that we had the name, and the New York Times reporters also verified that Alon Scagio was the shooter. They did that independently, so we had the
Oh,
New
they
York
knew
Times.
already.
No, they didn't know, but when the documentary came out, they went and did their own reporting to confirm that we had the right name.
Okay.
Um, and also, I did work with the Israeli military on this. We went to them and brought the name to the Israeli military. They wouldn't comment on the record,
Mm,
but through our sources, also with the Israeli military, we also feel like we got a certain layer of off the record confidence that we had the right name.
mm,
So we did multiple ways of verifying we had the right soldier.
well done. I mean, looking at that and the fact that you, a journalist, could find out who the killer was, find this information, find his unit, find the role, he's everything about this guy. But the White House and the State Department claim they couldn't. How do you explain the gap? Or was it rather they couldn't or they didn't want to?
They didn't want to, of course. The Israeli military blocked the FBI from carrying out an investigation in Israel and refused to cooperate with them. The Israeli government refused to provide the soldier's name. And that's how, for me as an American reporter who's covered the Pentagon and the White House and the State Department, I thought that there must have been some American official that knew the name, that must have gotten it somewhere along the way, that some, military official or State Department official at least had the name. And for me, that was going to be the easiest way to get it, working
Mm,
my sources in Washington. And it
mm,
turned out nobody in the Biden administration ever got the name. They never got it. They asked to interview the guy, and Israel refused, even for informational purposes. And of course, America could have pressed. This was an
mm,
American citizen that was killed.
mm,
America certainly could have pressed to to get Israel to provide that access on behalf of an American citizen, the first American journalist to ever be killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank.
mm,
And they did not put, the American influence on the line. We talk in the documentary to El Hulata, who was the national security advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Bennett at the time.
yeah.
And we asked him if, Bennett and Biden ever spoke about it. And he says, no, he says it wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue for them. And so that
Mm,
said everything to us about how important it was for the Biden administration.
obviously. Looking at one of the most disturbing revelations in the film is, the Duvdevan using Shireen's photograph for target practice. You know, something you'd see in a, American movie, Navy SEALs or whatever. It's not unusual, but really, what's more important is what does it say about the mentality, the mental health of these people, that we're dealing with, and we're seeing so much more exposure the last 2 years in particular. Like they're so righteous, and they've they're completely oblivious of any responsibility, guilt, or empathy.
Yeah, I think that was why that was so shocking to us. The Israeli soldier who gave us the name is the one who gave us that information. We had just turned off the camera when he told us that.
Mm,
But it speaks to sort of the way the Israeli soldiers dehumanize Palestinians.
mm,
She was a journalist. She wasn't a threat, but they dehumanized her to the point that they saw her as the enemy. And as you said in the introduction, what's happened since that time is that dehumanization has become institutionalized. So since that time, Israel has shut down Al Jazeera in the West Bank and basically called it an arm of Hamas.
mm,
And as you pointed out, Israel has now at times labeled journalists as combat propagandists and targeted them and killed them for being journalists that they say are affiliated with militant groups in Gaza. And so it's actually reached the point where you can imagine them justifying killing an Al Jazeera journalist as a militant, which they've done actually over and over again in Gaza. They've accused um, multiple Al Jazeera journalists of working for Hamas and
Mm.
directly targeted them, many, many times over. And so what you've seen, what we sort of try to say in the film is that Shireen's killing and the failure of America to hold Israel to account for the killing of an American journalist gave Israel this sense of impunity where
Yeah.
they knew they weren't going to be held to account for
Mm.
killing Palestinian journalists. And as you said, Israel is now considered the most dangerous country in the world for journalists, having killed more than 200, 280 journalists in the course of the war in Gaza.
In this interview, because we're talking about journalists, they call the journalists combatants, but they call health workers, aid workers, UNRWA, everyone who's trying to do anything good is a combatant. And they're all tied to Hamas supporters or whatever they are. So um, it's a line, a propaganda line that they use to be able to justify killing whoever the hell they want to kill, even children, and kidnapping 6, 8-year-old, boys. Shocking to watch over and over again. Very frightening. Did you notice any conflict in any of these soldiers? Did you find anything of remorse in them? Because I know there
Uh,
has been. There's a lot of, IDF soldiers that have obviously got mental health issues and committed suicide and whatever, but in this Duvdevan or the people that you spoke to.
Not with these guys, no. We didn't find any remorse. The soldier that we speak to in the film, he wasn't directly involved in the incident, but he knew the guy, and he says in the film, like, oh, this guy wasn't, you know, he wasn't eating him up inside. He says, it happened. He felt
Mm,
bad about it, but life goes on basically. And he justified it. In the documentary, he says that, if you see somebody holding something that looks like a weapon, they're holding a camera, that's justification enough to open fire.
mm,
And Ali Samudi and the other team, they did have a camera with them. Shireen herself wasn't holding a camera. It's actually not clear that this guy saw saw the camera, but no, there was no remorse with the ones that we spoke to.
mm. Let me jump to Colonel Steve Gabavics. He stayed silent for a while while he was in the military, participated anonymously in your documentary, and then in recent months, I think it was just October, was it, that he went fully public with his name and face and appearing on Democracy Now! What pushed him to make that final step? Have you been in touch with him? Obviously, you're connected.
Yeah, yeah, we're in regular contact. I was able to connect. He actually connected with me. I was working on the documentary and talking with all of my sources, and one of my sources knew Colonel Gabavics, and his conscience was really weighing on him because he carried out the only on the ground investigation of Shireen's killing, came back from the scene as a military expert, concluded she was intentionally targeted and that the soldier should have been able to see she was a journalist, and had his findings basically rejected by his commander, this General Fenzel, who oversaw security coordination for America in the area. And they battled over the conclusion, and ultimately the State Department released this statement saying that it was a the result of tragic circumstances and not intentional. Just incredibly guilt-ridden that the U.S. had failed an American journalist this way. And so he approached us. We sat down with him initially with his voice and face obscured because he was talking about things that touched on classified information at the time.
Mm,
And then the documentary came out and it got a positive reception. There was no sort of blowback to him for speaking out, no sort of efforts by the Trump administration to track him down or, try and prosecute him for
mm,
revealing anything that he shouldn't have. And I think when he saw the positive reception, he wanted to keep pushing for accountability. And, he's an incredibly credible source. He is the guy that carried out the investigation. He's a military officer. This is not some, mid-level State Department official, three steps removed, who read the report later. He carried it out. And
Mm.
so he went forward. He actually sat down with the New York Times, which did also its own investigation and spoke to other people that were involved in the investigation at the time and was able to advance the story even further. And Steve really feels, I think, this moral compulsion to want accountability still. He still is out there trying to push for accountability, trying to push for America to hold somebody to account in Israel for the killing of an American journalist. And so he's
Mm.
out there, and I really have a lot of respect for him for being brave enough to sit down with us and then brave enough to go public with his name.
Yeah. Well, has anything happened? Has anything changed in Washington since his public testimony? Any response from State Department, Congress, anyone politically?
Unfortunately, not yet. There has been a change in administrations. The committee to protect journalists has called for further investigation. We're hoping that perhaps Senator Van Hollen or some of these other lawmakers will try and hold some hearings on this. They could, Steve would be certainly willing to come forward to Congress to testify about this.
Mm,
But there's a lot going on in the world apart from this. There's still a lot going on in Gaza itself.
of course.
So we haven't seen the push yet for real accountability.
And just talking about Senator Van Hollen pushing for the report to be declassified, as you mentioned, he's also, I've seen a lot of his reports, even when he went to Israel recently with another congressman, or was it senator? I'm not sure. Maybe it was a congressman. Trump could win some points out of this because it was a Biden administration, but obviously there's, it's Israel. It's got to be, it's just because it's Israel and they don't want any negative publicity. And I'm sure it's coming from Israel because Israel is pulling all the strings. But what is it going to take? I keep thinking, how are these congressmen and women and senators? The evidence just keeps coming and overwhelming of how bad Israel is, not only in the slaughter and massacre and the genocide of Gaza and what it's doing to Lebanon, but to the Americans and the deceit, the lies, the corruption, killing Americans, kidnapping Americans, it really frustrates me, or it just, I think, is there ever going to be that, like, this is the straw that broke the camel's back? Let me rephrase it. Have you seen a shift in political, players in America, the congressmen or senators, in more quiet, less gung-ho, less aggressive about Israel? And are people taking a more, considered approach to how they support Israel?
I actually, we are seeing that actually subtly, not in a tidal wave, but I think, over the last 6 months, both among Democrats and Republicans, and public perception in the United States has shifted.
Yeah.
When this war started, the idea of saying that Israel was committing genocide was so, beyond the pale
Mm.
that nobody could say it. And then there was some sort of, paradigm shift where you started to see, celebrities, Hollywood stars openly saying Israel is committing genocide. And
Yeah.
it just kind of flipped. And then you saw, a more concerted effort to try and end the war. And so you saw that among lawmakers as well. You saw that among people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, On the Republican side,
Mm,
former Congressman Matt Gaetz, one of these sort of fringe Republicans,
mm,
he did a segment talking about Shireen Abu Akleh and
mm,
all the Palestinian Americans that have been killed in the West Bank by settlers in the past year or two.
mm,
So you have seen a shift among some people. Um, and I do think that's affected thinking. You do see in public opinion polls that there is a shift, especially among young Americans, in terms of supporting Palestinians more than Israelis after what they've seen in Gaza. But what's happening now, I think, is since the ceasefire that has ended, major combat in
mm,
Gaza, it hasn't obviously ended combat, and you have Gaza, of course, is divided now. Israel still occupies more than half of it and continues to carry out daily attacks in the other half. But it's taken Gaza off the front page by and
mm,
large.
mm,
And we're in a space now where it's not clear how people are gonna recalibrate.
mm,
Obviously, Israel supporters want to say the war's over, let's move on. They're trying to push normalization efforts with Saudi Arabia, sort of change the narrative. And to counter that, you do have people that are saying the war is not over. Gaza is still occupied.
mm,
The fighting continues. Southern Lebanon is still occupied. Southern Syria is still occupied. Like the conflict continues, and
mm,
we're in an interesting space where Israel wants to sort of, you know, flip the script now and get back to trying to rehabilitate its image. And it's
mm.
not clear where it's going to go. I think this is an open chapter, and we're still seeing how it's going to play out.
And I don't want to divert from the topic too much, but in Lebanon, it is a serious problem at the moment. The attack on Dahya on Sunday, killing another Hezbollah commander, the Pope coming in a couple of days. It's like it was a real shock because I was talking to someone from the Washington Institute last week on an interview on the consideration of a peace deal between Israel and Lebanon, and thinking how could that happen now when they're occupying, they're attacking every day, they're killing people. How could anyone contemplate a peace deal, especially when you've got no leverage? It's capitulation. It's like, well, we've got no leverage, so it's a crazy time to be talking, and. But I wanted to ask you whether you'd heard anything about from your sources about Israel's intentions, because there's a real fear here. What we're hearing and what I'm hearing from my sources, there's a war in the offing, and it's either, you know, it shouldn't happen while the Pope is here, but it could happen directly after, and it's going to, beyond what they're already doing. I mean, they've escalated in the last month their attacks across Lebanon. I have friends in the Bekaa who've got drones overhead all night, every night. It scares the hell out of them. They're scared to even drive their car. Drones follow them. Crossing the mountain, they're like petrified. And now there's this intention, fear of an intention by Israel to take it up another notch, to really attack the Lebanese government more than anything, and the army, and the humiliation of the Lebanese general recently when his trip to the commander-in-chief of the Lebanese army, whose trip was cancelled to Washington because he, called out Israel for attacking his country, killing his people, destroying his land. I mean, so I'm just on that. Is there anything you have anything on Lebanon?
I don't have any sort of, deeper knowledge than anybody else on it, but Israel has clearly changed the way that it operates in the Middle East now. It's no longer this idea of mowing the lawn. They continue to carry out these attacks on a daily basis across the region. One day it's Lebanon, the next day it's Syria, the next day it's Yemen, every day it's Gaza. The continued, attacks by settlers in the West Bank, basically on
Mm,
every front, they continue to operate in a very different way than they did before October 7th. And their leaders have said openly that this is their new strategy. And that leaves open the possibility, yes, that they could escalate in Lebanon and step up their occupation, send in more forces on the ground, carry out more airstrikes. And the Trump administration hasn't shown much interest in particularly the Lebanon-Israel conflict. They're more focused on Gaza, but I don't think they have much of a stake in trying to prevent Israel from, escalating in Lebanon if they think that's what they need to do.
When you look at it, you visualize Israel's just going is on an expansion project right now, taking Lebanon up to the Litani, moving into Gaza, taking parts of northern Syria. So it's already basically redrawn the lines. And the reality is that, there's a lot of people arguing in Lebanon, Israel's not the problem, Iran's the problem, but look at what is actually happening. It's on a mission. It's got a plan. It's implementing the plan. Trump and Jared Kushner are giving it the red stamp. They want to build the Gaza Riviera. They want to make a whole lot of money. With the conflict of interest blows my mind, but no one's calling for that. Congress, Senate, it just doesn't appear that Congress and Senate in America are actually governing. There's no government. There's no constitution. There's nothing. It's whatever Trump and his, merry men decide. So let's get back to the topic. I want to get into just a little bit more on Van Hollen because it relates directly to the journalist. He said in the documentary that he believes the failure to hold Israel accountable for Shireen contributed to deaths of other Americans and journalists in Gaza and Lebanon. And this was the green light. So this has led to going into that, what we see now with more than 280 journalists that have been killed in Gaza, a few journalists in Lebanon. And I wanted to ask you if that was the sort of, whether Shireen's death was the sort of marker, the point where Israel said journalists are open season on journalists. That's it. We don't care. Didn't get in trouble. We're going through. We're going to do it. Doesn't matter.
We think so. I think so. Yes, that because she was an American journalist, the first American journalist to be killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank, and because the U.S. let them get away with it and embraced the Israeli story, then Israel knew that it was not going to be held accountable. And they had a sense of impunity. There were journalists killed, before. I did have a friend, Fadel Shana, who was a Palestinian cameraman who was killed by an Israeli tank in Gaza when I was living there. He had set up a tripod on a hill to film some Israeli tanks that had moved in for a small incursion, and they were also, I think, 200 meters away. And he literally filmed his own death. The tank fires a round, a flechette round, which shoots out these tiny darts and killed him, and also argued that the soldier thought it was an RPG, a weapon, and so there were journalists killed by the Israeli military before Shireen, but it was, we do think, an inflection point because she was an American, because the U.S. didn't hold Israel to account at that point. And so nobody is held to account. In southern Lebanon, right after October 7th, there was a Reuters cameraman,
Sam Abdallah,
yeah,
yes.
who was killed. Israel has never released any report on that, even though there has been clear investigations showing that it was an Israeli tank that killed him. An American journalist, Dylan Collins, was also injured in that attack as well. And the Committee to Protect Journalists has been trying to get the U.S. to hold Israel to account for that. Israel's never even released its own report on it. So, they
Mm,
know that there's so many killings and of journalists that they just kind of blur in the background and people forget about the last one because
mm,
there's another killing of another journalist that's happened. So
mm.
there's been so many now that you lose track.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Ali Samudi, the producer that was injured with Shireen on the same day, he was arrested shortly after the film was released, I believe, and he's still in captivity or in Israeli custody, with no charges against him. Have you heard from him? Has any idea of what's happened to him? Was it retaliation? Was it Israel retaliating for the film and him being in it, and they could get him? They didn't get
He
Fatima, but
Ali was detained shortly before the film came out, so the Israeli military at that point didn't know he was in the film.
right.
He's a very prominent Palestinian journalist, well known, always sort of targeted and always, a threat to the Israeli government because he's out there on the front lines telling the story. And
Mm,
in the film, he says that he believes that the killing of Shireen was meant to send a chilling message to journalists to try and stop them from reporting on what they're doing in the West Bank. So he
mm,
was detained before the film came out on under Israel's administrative detention laws, which allow them to hold him without charge indefinitely. They have to renew it every few months, but they've admitted they don't have anything to charge him, but they just keep renewing his hold without charges. We've heard from his lawyers that his health is deteriorating. He's an elderly guy,
mm,
but they just continue to re-up his administrative detention, and without any indication they're going to release him.
mm. It's frightening because what can you do? They can do whatever the hell they want, and they are. And it's really a tragedy to be a Palestinian anywhere near Israel, Palestine or Israel today. Um, just on, let's look at the film and the success of the film and being called one of the most important movies of 2025 by the Frontline Club in London, sending shockwaves around the world. Did you anticipate that this would be the impact, that you would have such a tremendous response and reaction by audiences, by journalists?
No, no. This is my first documentary. It's the first for all of us that worked on the film. And we had an incredible team that put this together. Incredible work from
Yeah.
the director of photography and Connor to make it a really dramatic film. Working with Mehdi and Zeteo was incredible. Their direction, their input was invaluable. And so, yeah, we did not know how it would be received. One interesting aspect of it was that the Israeli military asked Israeli reporters not to report on the film and to not report on the name. And by and large, the Israeli media complied. Only the Times of Israel reported on the film. Everybody else, including
Even Haaretz?
Haaretz, yeah,
Oh,
even Haaretz, considered the lefty paper, never reported on it. And I
mm,
think that they did when Steve went public. There was some reporting in Israel on him going public.
mm,
That was the only time that they were willing to talk about sort of what came out of the film. But I
mm,
think you know, for me, I think when we've done screenings around the world, what's been most gratifying have been the people that knew Shireen that have come up to me and said thank you, for telling her story because
mm,
she was such a formative, seminal figure, and
mm.
to be able to give her story some justice and a
Yeah.
little bit of accountability and a little bit of closure for the family, I think has resonated with a lot of people in ways that we're really grateful for.
Well, the guy's dead, couldn't ask for a better ending. That's what I say. I mean, and he probably got killed in an attack in Jenin or something, so the fact that you got the name was the most important thing, that we know who did it. I think
Yeah.
that's, you know, that's justice. Um, on the point of Zeteo, was there any questioning about the bias? Because we know Mehdi's, strength, and I'm 100% behind him and everything, but people would like to in any way try and discredit it or say it's biased. Did you get any of that feedback?
Um, we have not had significant sort of pushback about the film. I we put our journalistic credibility on the line. Mehdi, was an incredible partner with us
Yeah.
in framing the film. We think that it stands as an objective piece of journalism. We are most critical of the Biden administration in this film. More so than Israel even. So um, we, in some of the stories about the film, when they refer to Zeteo, they might say that it's a left of center news organization and things like that. But the film itself, no, has really not gotten any accusations that it's biased or inaccurate.
Oh, it's good to know because, yeah, I mean, it's a cheap shot anyway. The fact is, you've got the information, you've got the facts are in the film, so it's irrelevant. But talking about the press, when was it recently that you spoke at the National Press Club and said that there were more revelations to the investigation that you will be coming out with soon? Can
Uh,
you give a
that,
hint?
well, that was about Steve Gabavics coming
Ah,
forward.
right. Okay.
Yeah, that was in July, but it took the New York Times
Oh,
a few months to actually get the story out because there was so much going on. But yeah, we were hoping that Steve's story was going to come out in the summer, but it took a lot longer than we hoped.
nice. Oh, yeah. I mean, so from that long, you've been getting him to coax him into becoming to go public. Is that right? From July.
Well, it was actually the New York Times that just took them so long to get the story out
Mm.
because they spoke with him
Oh,
in July, and then the New York Times did its own reporting to talk with other people that could verify Steve's story, and then there was a war going on as well. So, they had a lot of competing demands on reporters that they were pulled in many directions. It just took them a little while to get the story published. And,
mm,
they have their own fact checking and accuracy and,
mm.
took them a while to firm up their reporting.
Yeah. Yeah. Watching these movies and I know how important it is to get the story right. But I think also a lot of it is dragging the story because, we know the New York Times hasn't taken its role responsibly enough, and many media organizations haven't. So, but yes, they go through their process, but I think a lot of it is just dragging their feet to hold back because it's going to be bad for Israel. So, um, looking at, and I'm just coming into the last few questions because I know we're out of time, but what was the most challenging part of investigating Shireen's death? It's personal and beyond the logistics of getting there. And you've covered wars for 20 years. Was it because it was personal? What was it? What did you find the most difficult?
I think uh, the most challenging thing was identifying the Israeli soldier. We hit a lot of dead ends looking for that guy. Starting in Washington, nobody had the name, and once it became clear that there was nobody in America that knew the name, we had to go
Mm,
to Israel, and uh, you know, we had a limited budget for the film. We didn't have
mm,
endless time and money to
mm,
poke around. And so we were really under, sort of time and financial constraints in terms of how much time we could devote to trying to find him. And,
mm,
we were fortunate working with Ari that we found, the right entry point at the right time. We're really fortunate that that happened. If we hadn't hit those moments, if we hadn't
mm.
found the
All
right
those
people at the
breaks.
right time, that were willing to sit down with us, we could have come back empty-handed.
Over what period did you do that? I didn't ask that at the beginning. Over how long from when you started to when you finished or got the name of the killer?
We were working on this for some time. I was subtly probing U.S. officials who I thought might have the name, over many months. But in terms of filming the documentary, we went to Washington at the beginning of this year, January 2025, for a week and sat down with them. That's when it became clear nobody had the name. And
Mm.
then we went to Israel and the West Bank at the end of January, and we were there for about, I think it ended up being about 10 days. And so that was the window in which we
Wow.
basically like, this is the window where we
Mm.
need to see if we can find the guy. And
Wow.
we had been, as you see in the film, we were working with Ari while we were in Washington. Ari was working his sources and, I was saying, look, can you talk to this guy that we talked with? And can you talk to that guy? And I had some other sources.
Mm.
I met an Israeli filmmaker who we didn't end up putting in the film, who actually met the soldier, the Israeli soldier,
Wow.
who was able to use Oren Rosenfeld, who's an incredible documentary filmmaker himself.
Mm.
Um, he met the Israeli soldier who who carried out the shooting. He was able to set up a meeting with him, but he had a balaclava over his face. He didn't know his identity, and he gave his version of events a few months after Shireen was killed. So we
Wow.
had a bunch of pieces that sort of we were putting together, but ultimately we did get the name in that period of time.
That's
But we set
remarkable.
up we set up the documentary as a mystery because we didn't know if we might end up, having to say we tried and we couldn't find him.
Yeah.
And there might have been other ways we might have, if we hadn't gotten the name, we might have put Oren in the film to tell us about meeting the guy. There were
Mm.
other things that, sort of fell to the wayside because we got the name in the end.
Mm. That's absolutely right. But I mean, I'm astonished. I mean, it's great that you could turn it around. It's so important to get a story like that out as quickly as possible. I mean, sometimes you could spend. I made a documentary on Lebanon, but it took 5 years because from 2017 to 2021 because it just kept unraveling. Like the country was just, the revolution, the port explosion, the economic collapse. It was just you couldn't shut it down. Unfortunately, I was in control of the budget, so I had a bit more leeway, so I could keep going. Otherwise, when your budget's limited, it's you got to just shut down the film. But very exciting that you guys were able to do it and get it out so quickly, and it's done so well. I mean, it's gripping. I didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. So excellent work, and hopefully, I'm going back to Australia in a couple of weeks, and we might get might see if we can get something down there, for the film happening. I'm very connected to the Palestinian Action Group and the community in Australia as well. Just to finish off, just for listeners and viewers who are moved by this story and are still learning. So many people are still learning about Gaza, the Palestinian story, the 76 years of, the Nakba and everything that's been exposed about Israel now for the cat's out of the bag, baby. What would you say to them? What would you ask people to do as a journalist? I know it's hard. We're always the ones telling the story, but we have a responsibility also to do, call people to stand up as well. What would your question be to people, or demand, or request?
Our documentary "Who Killed Shireen" has been picked up by Al Jazeera, and we've done an updated version of it, which is now available on Al Jazeera's YouTube channel. So you can Google "Who Killed Shireen" and you can watch the 45-minute film, which actually has been updated with Steve Gabavics' voice, real voice, and his identity being in the film.
Mm.
I hope people
Oh,
will
great.
watch that.
Mm.
And yeah, I think as someone who's been covering the conflict for a couple of decades, it's heartening to see a new generation of people coming forward and learning about it and putting a critical lens to it. And I think there's a lot of incredible people out there that you can follow. This I would just say, the story is not over, especially for Gaza. I spent so much time in Gaza. I have so many friends that are Gazans. Uh, I would just encourage people to remember that this war is not over, and to stay focused on it and keep educating yourself, keep asking the critical questions about what is happening there, and keep pushing for accountability and justice in this conflict. I do think that what happened in America in terms of people asking these questions did change people's thinking and did change the narrative, which when this war started, I did not think could happen. And to see the fact that public opinion changes and that people can make a difference is heartening. And I just encourage people to keep on that and not forget Gaza now that it's moved into a different phase.
Yeah, that's so true, and thank you for that reminder for everyone to be very clear that they need to keep talking about Gaza. This isn't over, as you mentioned earlier. The war's not over. The genocide isn't over, but it's just moved into a different phase, and we can't be deluded into thinking that things are okay. And I try and do that as much as I can on my platform to educate people, to show them it's still continuing. But thank you, Dion. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you, talking to you, and finding out about your story, as well as the great investigative piece on who killed Shireen. Thank you very, very much. I'll be sharing links, and we'll be doing lots over the December. We'll continue to share snippets, so there'll be a lot going out. So we'll try and get as much attention on the film as possible, and stay in touch. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on the program with you. I really appreciate your work as well, and appreciate you giving us a chance to talk about the film.
Absolutely a pleasure. Our duty. Thank you, Dion.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and experiencing firsthand the real stories told by real people. I hope you found value and meaning, and encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Your ongoing financial support is vital to our ability to continue delivering these stories, so please remember to click on the donate button in the description, giving only what you can afford. I spent my whole life giving my time, money and skill to serve human rights and social justice causes, and I know it's not easy to keep giving selflessly. But this work is important because the mainstream media has failed to live up to their obligations. So we need to step up, speak up, or we're no better than them. I believe by tuning in to this podcast, you are someone who wants to know the facts and the truth, so you can independently decide what to believe and what not to. My job is to deliver that information. Yours is to place a value on it. Whatever you decide is humbly welcome. Thanks again, and see you on the next episode of Real Talk.